The United States is carrying a staggering $37 trillion in national debt, the largest financial burden any country has ever accumulated, more than the world's entire annual economic output just a couple of decades ago. And here's the truth almost no one is saying out loud. Not planning to pay it. They're preparing to eliminate it. Not through repayment, not through spending cuts, not through tax increases, but through a quiet, engineered collapse in the value of the dollar. And the instruments they are re-preparing for this reset are the ones most people assume operate outside government control. What you're watching is the construction of a secondary monetary system, the U.S. quietly accumulating Bitcoin and gold, preparing to reprice those assets dramatically higher, and using that new valuation to mathematically neutralize a debt load that can't be repaid. Here's the part that should concern you. When gold and crypto are intentionally revalued upward, the dollar drops. Every dollar you hold becomes weaker. Every bond you own falls in real value. Your savings lose purchasing power. You're being drained silently, legally, and permanently, and most people won't understand what happened until it's too late. In today's video, I'll break down exactly how this works. Not theories, but the real mechanics behind erasing debt through asset revaluation. There's historical precedent for all of it. This strategy has been used before. I'll show you what the U.S. is doing right now, the executive orders, the gold accounting tricks, and the quiet Bitcoin accumulation, and I'll lay out the timeline. When this reset likely happens, how fast it unfolds, and what you must do before it's too late. Because this isn't years away, the setup is already underway. Let's start with the biggest misconception. Government debt is nothing like personal debt. When you owe money, you must repay it with real value. More work, fewer expenses, selling assets. But governments issue the currency itself. That means they can redefine value with the stroke of a pen. They can change what their own assets are worth on paper and shrink debt without ever paying it back. This is the essence of a monetary reset, and history is full of them. Here's the pattern. In 1933, after the Great Depression and World War I, the U.S. was drowning in deflation and rising debt. The economy was collapsing. So the Roosevelt administration executed one of the most dramatic monetary moves in American history. They raised the official price of gold by nearly 70%. Here's what actually happened. For more than 50 years, gold was fixed at $20.67 per ounce. The dollar itself was defined by that ratio, but Washington needed more value on its books. So Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, banning private gold ownership. Citizens were forced to sell their gold to the government at the fixed price. They complied. Then the revaluation hit. In 1934, the official price was changed to $35 per ounce, a 69% jump overnight. Here's what that did. The government now held the majority of national gold. At $20.67 per ounce, the reserves were valued at roughly $4 billion. At $35 per ounce, those same reserves were suddenly worth $6.8 billion. Nearly $3 billion in new value was created with a single announcement. And because debt was denominated in dollars, the inflation that followed shrank the real debt burden dramatically. In less than 5 years, the debt-to-GDP ratio fell from 40% to 25%. 15 points erased without paying anything back. Meanwhile, anyone holding dollars watched their purchasing power erode over the next decade. This is the playbook, and it's being set up again. Today, the U.S. faces $37 trillion in federal debt, a 132% debt-to-GDP ratio, higher than any point outside World War II. Interest payments are already above $1.2 trillion a year. If rates stay elevated, that number climbs toward $1.8 trillion. This path is mathematically impossible to sustain. Everyone in Washington knows it. The Federal Reserve knows it. The Congressional Budget Office knows it. There is no combination of taxes, cuts, or growth that fixes this. There's only one tool left: devaluation. But they can't openly print money. That causes panic. They need a mechanism that looks strategic, not desperate. Enter Bitcoin and gold. On January 23, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order creating a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve. Publicly, the goal was digital asset leadership. In reality, it set the foundation for future Bitcoin revaluation. The U.S. already controls around 210,000 seized Bitcoin. But proposals like Senator Cynthia Lummis' Bitcoin bill outline a long-term plan to acquire up to 1 million BTC not through open market purchases, but through seizures, forfeitures, and partnerships with miners. Once they hold enough, they can reprice it. Imagine the government announcing it holds 1 million BTC and is marking it at $1 million per coin for reserve accounting. A 10 increase, suddenly, they possess a $1 trillion asset without spending a penny. Markets follow. Bitcoin explodes. The dollar weakens. The real value of debt shrinks. Now layer gold on top. The U.S. holds 8,133 tons of gold, minus 261 million ounces. At $2,800 per ounce, that's over $730 billion in real market value. But on federal balance sheets, it's still recorded at $42.22 per ounce, a number from 1973. Why so low? Because it gives them room to raise it later. If gold is revalued to $20,000 per ounce, the U.S. instantly holds over $5 trillion in gold value. Add $1 trillion from Bitcoin revaluation, and the government manufactures $6 trillion in new assets out of thin air. But this also means the dollar collapses relative to those assets. Gold rising from $2,800 to $20,000 implies an 85% drop in the dollar's value. Bitcoin jumping to $1 million implies a 90% drop. This translates into real-life inflation, food doubling, housing exploding, savings destroyed. But the debt shrinks. That is the plan. Based on current policy moves and public statements, here's the most likely timeline. 2025 accumulation phase quiet Bitcoin buildup, renewed gold discussions, narrative shaping, 2026 crisis phase debt ceiling standoff, bond market stress. The emergency required radical action. 2027 revaluation phase official Bitcoin reserve announcement, BTC was revalued to $1 million for reserves. Gold was revalued to $20,000 per ounce. The dollar was partially backed to restore confidence. The dollar devalued massively. Debt erased, savers wiped out. This same pattern played out in Weimar Germany, Argentina, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. Governments devalue to survive. Winners. Governments, political elites, the wealthy gold and Bitcoin holders countries with large gold reserves losers, middle-class savers bondholders pension funds, anyone holding dollars wage earners. The personal strategy is simple. Move out of dollar-denominated assets. Hold real scarce assets, Bitcoin, gold, real estate, commodities, hold minimal cash. Avoid bonds entirely. Because when the revaluation begins, it will be rapid. And by the time the public realizes what's happening, it will already be too late.